All right, we're very excited to be here today with Dr. Dean Ornish. Dr. Ornish is a physician, an author, a speaker, and the founder of the Preventative Medicine Research Institute in Sausalito, California. He's also a professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. He's a New York Times bestselling author and has written 11 books about nutrition and health, and is considered the godfather of lifestyle medicine. Dr. Ornish is a pioneer in reversing heart disease using plant-based nutrition, and his research shows how conditions like type 2 diabetes and prostate cancer can be slowed, stopped, and even reversed using lifestyle change. Dr. Ornish has worked tirelessly for 16 years with Medicare and Medicaid to create a new coverage category called intensive cardiac rehabilitation, which focuses on comprehensive lifestyle changes. So thank you so much for being with us here today, Dr. Ornish.
It's my great pleasure. Thanks for hosting us.
Absolutely.
So, Dr. Ornish, you were one of the first doctors to prove to the medical world that heart disease is not just preventable, but reversible. Can you talk to us about your research and clinical experience in reversing heart disease through diet?
Well, I appreciate that. We were actually the first to show that it could be done in randomized trials. I began doing this work 40 years ago with a pilot study of 10 patients where we found that after just a month, the blood flow to the heart improved significantly, and most people became angina or chest pain free. Then we did a smaller randomized trial of about 48 patients, and we showed that after just 24 days, the heart was beating more normally, and again, showed over a greater 91% reduction in the frequency of chest pain. And then we did the most definitive study called the Lifestyle Heart Trial, where we used quantitative arteriography to measure the amount of blockages in the arteries, as well as cardiac PET scans to measure blood flow to the heart. And we found that after a year, there was some reversal of the blockages. The arteries that feed the heart with blood that normally get more and more clogged over time got less and less clogged, and even more reversal after 5 years and after 1 year. That was the first time that had been shown. Whereas the randomized control group showed worsening of their arterial blockages after 1 year and even more so after 5 years. And we published that in the Journal of the American Medical Association, the Lancet, the American Journal of Cardiology, and many other journals like that. And we found that the blood flow to the heart improved by 400% when compared to the randomized control group. So these were not small differences, they were huge. We also found that the more people changed, the more they improved at any age, which is a pattern that we found in all of the studies we've done. And you know, with all the talk about personalized medicine, and I think if you're talking about personalizing a new immunotherapy for a particular type of melanoma or pancreatic cell tumor, those can be life-saving. But if you're talking about the lifestyle changes that can prevent or reverse the most common chronic diseases like heart disease and diabetes and so on, it wasn't like there was one set of lifestyle changes for heart disease, a different one for diabetes, a different one for prostate cancer or breast cancer or so on. We found it was the same for all of them. And in a series of studies, we found that people with type 2 diabetes, we could get their hemoglobin A1Cs down below the level at which that the American Diabetes Association says if you can get their hemoglobin A1C down below 7, you can prevent the horrible complications of diabetes, whereas getting it down with drugs may not be nearly as effective. Mm-hmm. You know, when people get put on medications to lower their blood pressure, their cholesterol, their blood sugar, and they say, "Doctor, how long do I have to take these?" What does the doctor usually say? They usually say forever, right? It's like sometimes when I lecture, I'll show a cartoon of doctors busily mopping up the floor around a sink that's overflowing. And it's like, how long do I have to mop up the floor? Like forever. Well, why don't we just turn off the faucet? And what we're learning is that our bodies often have a remarkable capacity to begin healing, and much more quickly than we had once realized, if we can treat the cause or turn off the faucet, if you will, which to a larger degree than we had once realized are the lifestyle choices that we make each day. And what we're finding is that the more diseases we study and the more underlying biological mechanisms we do research on, the more reasons we have to explain why these lifestyle changes are so powerful and how quickly they can occur. So we did a randomized controlled trial of men with early stage prostate cancer with Dr. Peter Carroll, the chair of urology at UCSF, and the late Dr. Bill Fair, who at the time was the chair of urology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And we found that we could slow, stop, or reverse the progression of men with early stage prostate cancer and by extension breast cancer. We found that when you change your lifestyle, it changes your genes, and over 500 genes were changed. And in fact, turning on the good genes, turning off the bad genes, the genes that tend to cause diabetes and heart disease and prostate, breast, and colon cancer. Just, you know, within just 3 months, over 500 genes changed, for all in a beneficial direction. We found these same lifestyle changes lengthen telomeres, the ends of our chromosomes that regulate cellular aging, in a sense, beginning to reverse aging at a cellular level. And so again, one of the reasons why when people have diabetes that they're more likely to get heart disease and other conditions is that I think that so many of these chronic diseases share very similar underlying biological mechanisms, all of which are affected by these same diet and lifestyle changes, which is why, these same simple diet and lifestyle recommendations have such far-reaching implications, including but by no means limited to those who have type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, so that's a perfect segue into the next question here, which is that, this online summit is specifically for people living with diabetes, whether it's type 1, type 1.5, prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, gestational diabetes. And I think a lot of this, of people living with diabetes aren't necessarily aware of the fact that their cardiovascular health is compromised as a result of potentially uncontrolled blood glucose. So could you go into a little bit of information here about, what is the connection between living with diabetes and cardiovascular disease?
Well, 84% of people who have diabetes die from heart disease, so it's pretty common. And so the good news is that you don't have to choose between one set of diet and lifestyle recommendations for reversing your diabetes and a different one for heart disease. They're one and the same, again, because they share so many of the same underlying biological mechanisms. And so part of the issue with diabetes, let's say type 2 diabetes, which is the most common, used to be called adult onset, although now so many kids are getting it as well. And type 2 diabetes is, well, let's start with type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease where you make antibodies to the islet cells in your pancreas that produce insulin. So it's a deficiency of insulin. But type 2 diabetes, your body is actually making more insulin than most people. But the insulin binds to receptors called insulin receptors, and they can downregulate so that it takes more and more insulin to get a given effect. Because over time, when these receptors are exposed to repeated surges of insulin, because let's say you eat a lot of sugar or refined carbohydrates, if you go from, say, whole wheat flour to white flour, or from brown rice to white rice, you're removing the fiber in the bran, and it's the fiber in the bran that generally fill you up before you get too many calories. But they also slow the rate of absorption from your gut into your blood. So if you eat a lot of sugar, your blood sugar zooms up, your pancreas senses that your blood sugar is too high because your body wants to keep it in certain limits. It secretes insulin to bring it back down, which is good. But over time, if it happens over and over and over again, those repeated insulin surges are kind of like the boy who cried wolf at a receptor level. The receptor goes, oh, not more insulin, and kind of becomes more insensitive, or insulin downregulates, or becomes insulin resistant. These are all just different ways of saying the same thing. So that even though your body is making the insulin, your receptors are not really responding to it very well. So it takes higher and higher doses to keep your blood sugar under control. And so for many people, they need to be on medication to keep that from happening. But a number of studies have shown that getting your blood sugar down with drugs doesn't prevent the premature mortality and the horrible complications of diabetes nearly as well as getting it down with diet and lifestyle. The American Diabetes Association says that if you can get your hemoglobin A1C, which is just like a 2-month average measure of your blood sugar, down below 7.0 with lifestyle, you can prevent many, if not most, or even all of those complications of diabetes. And what we find is that the receptors become more insulin sensitive. And so your body doesn't need as much insulin. And so even people who are taking either oral or injections of drugs to lower their blood sugar, under their doctor's supervision, can reduce or even get off of these medications and still have their blood sugar in a normal range. The Navigator study and the Accord studies, both of which were in the New England Journal of Medicine, showed that tight control of blood sugar with drugs actually increased premature mortality because people sometimes went too far and got their blood sugars too low. And likewise, getting your blood sugar down with drugs didn't prevent the blindness, the amputations, the kidney failure, the heart attacks, the strokes, the impotence, all the horrible complications of diabetes. But if you can get it down with diet and lifestyle, in most cases, you can reduce or get off these medications altogether. And then by doing so, you're going to greatly reduce or even eliminate these horrible complications.
Okay, so let's move into talking a little bit about low carbohydrate diets versus low fat diets. So there's many people out there that have been told the most effective form of nutrition to lose weight, drop their LDL cholesterol, reverse diabetes is to eat a ketogenic diet, high in fat, protein, and low in carbohydrate energy. So for the average person out there, the science on the internet is very confusing. Can you enlighten us?
Yeah, it's not only confusing for the average person out there, it's confusing for a lot of doctors as well, in part because we don't really learn much about nutrition in our medical training. Now, the ketogenic diet or the Atkins diet or the paleo diet or whatever name you want to attach to it, it goes through different incarnations. You know, it keeps coming back from the dead. It's based on a half-truth. And the half-truth is that Americans eat too many refined carbs and sugar and concentrated sweeteners. And as we mentioned earlier, when you when you eat a lot of sugar, pardon me, your blood sugar zooms up, your pancreas makes insulin to bring it back down, but these repeated insulin surges over time can lead to insulin resistance. So Dr. Atkins and I debated many times before he died, as it turns out, of heart disease. And we agreed on that point, that Americans eat too many refined carbs. And so if you stop eating refined carbs, you're going to lose weight, which is why people lose weight on an Atkins diet. It's what you replace them with that becomes a point of difference. Now, I'd love to be able to tell your viewers that bacon and pork rind and sausage and so on are health foods, but they're not, you know, and it's just the way it is. I would love to be able to say that, but, you know, it's just not true. Now, on the other hand, if you replace refined carbs with what are called good carbs, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and soy products in their natural state, they're high in fiber, which, as I mentioned earlier, fills you up before you get too many calories. You can only eat so many apples, you can get full before you get too many calories. But also slows the rate of absorption. So instead of getting these wide swings in your blood sugar, you get more of a constant level throughout the day. But instead of mortgaging your health by eating, you know, a lot of red meat and animal protein and so on, it's not just fat versus carbs, but there's more and more evidence that the animal protein itself is harmful. Studies have shown that people who eat a lot of animal protein are 75% more likely to die of premature death from all causes, and 400 to 500% higher risk of diabetes, prostate, breast, and colon cancer, as well as heart disease. So if you actually look at you can lose weight on an Atkins diet. You can lose weight on, you know, smoking cigarettes is a good way to lose weight. You know, chemotherapy is a good way to lose weight. Don't recommend it. But you can lose at least as much weight and even more if you eat or at least comparable amounts by eating good carbs. But instead of mortgaging your weight, you're enhancing it. Because it's not just enough to lose weight. You have to say, what's happening in the arteries? And we've done studies showing that when you go on a whole foods plant-based diet, particularly when it's combined with meditation and yoga, exercise, and love and support, the arteries become less clogged over time. The more you do it, the less clogged they become. And the longer you do it, the more less clogged they become. Whereas on a Atkins or paleo or ketogenic diet or whatever name you want to give to it, their arteries get more clogged over time, even though they're losing weight. And so it's important to lose weight in a way that enhances your health and not that mortgages it.
It's brilliant. So in 2017, you co-authored a paper called Trending Cardiovascular Nutrition Controversies, in which you state the following, and I quote, "All sources of animal protein, including eggs, fish, poultry, red meat, and processed red meats, were noted to increase all-cause mortality relative to vegetable protein, with processed red meat being associated with more cardiovascular deaths and egg consumption being associated with more cancer deaths." So can you just give a little insight here for our listeners into like how aggressive do they really need to be? Do they have to eliminate all of these products, or is it really a sliding scale where you can sort of reduce and gain a lot of benefit just from moving towards less?
Right. Well, that study was done by Walter Willett and his group at the Harvard School of Public Health, where they found that the relative risk of different diseases, that processed red meat was the highest, followed by regular red meat, then chicken, then fish, and so on. And in all of our studies, we found that, what you call a sliding scale. I wrote a book called The Spectrum that was based on the finding in all of our studies that really surprised me. When I started doing this work, I thought that the younger people with less severe disease would do better, but I was wrong. It wasn't how old or how sick they were. It was primarily a function of how much they changed their lifestyle. The more you change, the more you improve. And the more you change your lifestyle, the better you feel. And the better you feel, the more you want to keep doing it. So you get into a virtuous cycle instead of a negative one. And so, start where you are. And if you have heart disease or life-threatening disease, that's more the pound of cure. You really do have to make big changes. That's why we were able to show for the first time that you could reverse heart disease, because people didn't go far enough. The regular doctor's recommendations and the Heart Association and so on don't go far enough to reverse disease. But if you're just trying to get your blood sugar down, let's say you've got metabolic syndrome, start where you are. So in the book, I categorize foods from the most healthy, what I call group 1 foods, the plant-based foods. Group 5 are the processed red meats and so on, and group 2 through 4 in the middle. So, part of what I've learned is what enables people to make sustainable changes. And if I tell somebody, eat this, don't eat that, do this, don't do that, they immediately want to do just the opposite. It's just human nature. It goes back to, the first dietary intervention when God said, don't eat the apple, and that didn't go so well, and that was God talking, so we're not going to do And also I've learned that even more than being healthy, people want to feel free and in control. So as soon as I tell somebody, do this, don't do that, they want to do just the opposite. That's just human nature. And so, and if you go on a diet, chances are you're going to go off a diet, because diets are, again, telling people what to do, and people don't like to feel constrained. And so they get off the diet, they feel bad, and they have all this guilt and anger and humiliation, which really are the most toxic emotions, so you might as well just finish the pint of ice cream. Because once you label foods good or bad, it's a very small step to saying I'm a bad person because I had bad food. So, might as well just finish the burger or whatever. So we took a different approach and said, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. And so your listeners, I'm not here to tell you what to do, your viewers. I'm saying, here's what we did, here's what we found. You decide, and if you're my patient, I say, I'll support whatever you choose because it's your life. It's not for me to tell you what to do. But instead of saying, here's a rigid diet, and thou shalt not, and you must never, and all of that, which really turns me off, is to say, look, what matters most is your overall way of eating and living. If you don't have a life-threatening disease, if you say you have high blood sugar, or you want to try to reduce or get off insulin, again, under your doctor's care, so say, what are you eating now? Well, I'm eating mostly group 5 foods, unhealthy foods. So instead of saying, well, don't eat that, eat this instead, I'd say, how much are you willing to change? Oh, no one's ever asked me that before. Oh, I don't know. I'll eat less of the unhealthy group 5 and I'll eat more of the groups 1 through 4. Okay, great. How much exercise are you doing? Not so much. How much are you willing to do? Oh, I don't know. I'll walk half an hour 3 times a week. That's good. How much yoga meditation are you doing? 0. How much are you willing to do? I don't know. I'll meditate half an hour a day. Great. How much love and support do you have? Not enough. I'll spend more time with my friends and families. Great. We'll support that degree of change, and even and we'll track it for a month or 2. Now, during that month, if you indulge yourself one day, it doesn't mean you cheated or you're bad or you failed. Just eat healthier the next. You forget to exercise one day or you're too busy, do a little more the next. You get the idea. And I just find that's a much more sustainable and more compassionate approach, because you can't fail. There's no diet to get on. There's no diet to get off. Now, after a month or whatever period of time, let's say you wanted to get your hemoglobin A1C down from 7.5 to 6.5, below 7. And let's say it came down to 7.1. You say, great, you move in the right direction. Now, eat even more of the healthier foods, even less of the others, not all the time necessarily, but move more in that direction, and then let's see how you do. Now, the other school of thought we also found, paradoxically, is to make really big changes all at once. And even though that may be counterintuitive, it's like, well, if I can't make small changes, how am I going to make big ones? But sometimes when you make small changes, you get the worst of both worlds. You have the hassle because you're not eating everything you want, but you're not really making changes big enough to feel that much better or to get much of a change in your blood sugar or whatever you're measuring. But if you go say, I'm going to go all the way to a plant-based diet, I'm just going to eat that all the time. I'm going to meditate and do yoga for an hour a day. I'm going to exercise for a half hour a day. I'm going to spend more time with my friends and family. Generally, most people find that they feel so much better so quickly because, the more you change, the better you feel, that it reframes the reason for change from fear of something bad happening down the road, like, one of the diabetic complications or premature death, to joy of living. And joy of living is what's sustainable. You think more clearly, you have more energy, you get off these medications, you need less sleep, your sexual function improves, and so on. Studies have shown that men who just one single plant-based meal caused, 200 to 300% more nocturnal erections, during the night than people who just had one meat-based diet. I mean, it's amazing how dynamic these underlying biological mechanisms are, for better and for worse, and how quickly you can feel better when you make big enough changes in your diet and lifestyle.
So going based off of what you were just saying here about, integrating community and social support, you're a giant advocate, which we love, about, integrating love and community into a lifestyle change program for maximum success.
Right.
So does a strong social network and love and community have documented positive effects on positive health?
Yeah, I wrote a book called Love and Survival back in 1998 that reviewed hundreds and now there are thousands of studies that show that people who are lonely and depressed are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely from all causes than those who have a sense of love and connection and community. I don't know anything in medicine that has that. Even smoking doesn't have that big an impact. Nicholas Christakis at Harvard found that if your friends are obese, you're 45% more likely to be obese yourself. If it's your friend's friend, you're 25% more likely. And if it's your friend's friend's friend, you're 10% more likely to be obese, even if you've never met them. That's how interconnected we are. And so I think that the real epidemic in our culture isn't just heart disease or diabetes, it's loneliness and depression. I was suicidally depressed when I was in college. That's how I got interested in this, became my life's work, is that's what helped me when I was so depressed. So I've gotten in the habit of when someone comes to me as a patient, and I would just ask the people who are watching this, we assume that people want to live longer, but telling somebody who's lonely and depressed that they're going to live longer, like, they say things like, you don't get it. I'm just trying to get through the day. So I'll ask people, like, why do you want to live longer? And people are like, oh, no one's ever asked me that before. There's always an assumption that people want to live longer, but many people don't. I think the whole opioid epidemic, video games, I've had patients say, I've got 20 friends in this package of cigarettes. They're always there for me and nobody else is, or food fills that void, or fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain. We have lots of ways of trying to distract or numb or bypass or, numb ourselves from this pain, distance ourselves from this pain. But our approach is to say, the pain isn't the problem. The pain's the messenger. It's saying, hey, listen up, pay attention. You're not doing something that's in your best interest. And so when people begin to make these changes in their diet and lifestyle, most people find that they feel so much better so quickly. It reframes the reason for making these changes from fear of dying to joy of living. We find in our studies that depression scores are cut by more than 50%. There's this pervasive myth, am I going to live longer? Is it just going to seem longer if I eat, a plant-based diet? And people are actually 50% less depressed. These social factors are incredibly meaningful. 50 years ago, most people had an extended family or a job that felt secure, or a church or synagogue, or a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people. And most people today don't have any of those things. And part of the value of research is to raise the level of awareness of how much these things matter. And they matter a lot more than we thought. So rather than viewing the time that you spend with your friends and family and loved ones as a luxury to do after you've done the important stuff, to realize this is the important stuff, and nothing may have a bigger impact on your health and well-being. So when someone says, I want to live longer because I want to watch my kids grow up, I want to dance at their wedding, I want to write a book, I want to make love with my spouse, I want to, whatever it happens to be, and you say, okay, great, here's how you can accomplish that. Then it creates a sense of meaning to those actions. If you say, oh, I've got diabetes, I can't eat everything I want, life sucks, that's not sustainable. If you say, I'm choosing not to eat certain foods so that I can get off these medications under my doctor's care, so that I can have good sexual function, I can make love, I can dance, I can do all the things that I want to do, that what I gain is so much more than what I give up, because these underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic. You don't have to wait that long to feel better if you're making these changes. That creates a sense of meaning. Most spiritual traditions, have dietary guidelines, and they're all different from each other. And I thought, like, why is that? One religion you can eat this, but not on Fridays, or not during Ramadan, or, whatever. Is God confused? I don't know. But what I do know is that when you just consciously choose not to eat certain foods, instead of saying, oh, I'm so deprived because my doctor told me I can't eat all this stuff, that's not sustainable. Then you just walk around with a chip on your shoulder, feeling kind of angry and deprived, like, how come they get to eat that stuff and I don't? That's not sustainable. If you say instead, and reframe that, I'm choosing not to eat certain foods because if I choose not to do something that I otherwise could do, it imbues those choices with meaning. If it's meaningful, then it's sustainable. By analogy, if you're in a committed monogamous relationship, like, why would not have sex with everybody? Well, because if you choose to be with one person, you can create a sense of intimacy that goes far beyond what you could do otherwise. A South Indian saint named Ramakrishna once said 100 years ago, you can dig a shallow well and never reach, a lot of shallow wells and never reach water, or one deep one and reach the wellspring. Again, what you gain is so much more than what you give up. So for those of you who have diabetes and are watching this, instead of feeling deprived and resentful and angry, which is totally understandable, but not really making you very happy, to say, wait a minute, I can think more multidimensionally. I don't have to be stuck in this either or binary way of looking at things. I'm saying, I'm choosing not to eat certain foods because what I gain is so much more than what I give up. I grew up in Texas eating meat 3 or 4 times a day, and I liked it. But when I stopped eating it when I was 19, I found my depression went away. I felt so much better. I could do things I couldn't do before. That what I gained was so much more than what I gave up. And that's ultimately what makes it meaningful and therefore sustainable.
That's a really, really great answer. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
At a recent conference, one of our team members heard you talk about how your program now uses technology to maintain a strong sense of community. So how does your program do it in today's tech-enabled world?
That's a good question. The component of our program is what we call Lovacy, and we have support groups that help people practice what's that like. As I mentioned before, 50 years ago, if you had an extended family that you saw regularly, or a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people, and you grew up there, people know you. It's kind of like an avatar. I see you. It's they don't just see your Facebook profile or your bio sketch, all the good things. They see where you messed up and your dark side, and they're still there for you. And there's something really powerfully, primally human and healing about being with people who see you, warts and all, and are still there for you. It's just powerful. And many people don't have that experience today because of these breakdown of these social networks that used to give that to people. So we recreate that in our support groups by creating a safe environment, because you can only be intimate to the degree you can open your heart and be vulnerable. And you can only do that to the degree you feel safe. It goes back to being like in a committed monogamous marriage, let's say. It's the same idea here. You're committed to the idea that what goes in the group stays in the group, that we're going to talk about our feelings because it's our feelings that connect us. And it's so powerful and meaningful that people want to continue doing that after our program, which is now covered by Medicare and most insurance companies, is a 9-week program. We also have these 12-day residential retreats. If you just go to ornish.com, you can learn about all these things. And the support groups are an important part of that. But after they finish either their 12-day retreat or the 9-week program, they continue to meet with each other using the same technology that we're using here, Zoom, because they've already formed that sense of safety and the bonding and the sense of intimacy and vulnerability that goes along with that. So in some ways, we used to have people just meet on their own after they finished their 9 weeks, and that worked well, but sometimes people live far away, or it's just a hassle to drive somewhere for an hour or two. Now, like every Thursday from 4 to 5 or whatever time they pick, they all tune in, the 15 people in their group. And in some ways, it's actually easier because you've already got the intimacy there. So you're just including that, but you can do it from your own living room. And so we get much higher attendance because you don't have to get in a car and drive anywhere. And it works amazingly well. So, whether it's done virtually or whether it's done in person, these connections can be very powerful, but particularly if you can talk about what's really authentically going on in your life, not just talking about, your Facebook profile and the cool things you've been doing.
I'm actually really glad to hear you say that you guys are using technology to your advantage, and fostering these small group video conferencing, because we do the exact same thing in our lifestyle change program for people living with diabetes. And we get feedback from people all the time that it's the most powerful program that they've ever participated in, because you can see other people's faces, you can share vulnerable emotions, there's no judgment associated with it, and it's a positive experience for all.
Yeah, most people, when they think about they think about diet. And diet's important, no doubt. But if you don't deal with these other issues, it's very hard for people to sustain a diet. Whereas if you can help people use these support groups to create meaning and intimacy, the yoga and meditation to quiet down their mind and body, not just to manage stress, which they can do, but the ancient swamis and yogis and priests and monks and rabbis and so on didn't discover these techniques and use them just to manage stress or lower their cholesterol or even unclog their arteries. They're really powerful tools for quieting down our mind and body to experience more of an inner sense of peace and joy and well-being. And to realize that's really our nature. It's not that these techniques bring you that, it's that we have them there already. And that may sound like semantics, but it's all the difference in the world, because if I have to get my sense of self-worth or my sense of identity or my sense of happiness or even my sense of health and well-being from outside myself, then everything out there has power over me. If the question shifts and it's more like, oh, I have that already, and if I'm feeling anxious or worried or a little depressed, my question is not like, how can I get more stuff that I think I need to be happy, but rather, how can I stop disturbing what's already there? How can I stop thinking that if only I had more whatever, then I'd be happy? I studied for many years with a ecumenical spiritual teacher named Swami Satchidananda, and people would say, what are you, a Hindu? And he'd say, no, I'm an undu. It's the idea that we're born with a sense of ease and well-being, and we disturb that and become diseased, where we're born fine and we define that by getting stuck in all these definitions. And so much suffering comes from seeing ourselves as being fundamentally separate from other people. You're the other. Once you can call someone the other, then you do bad things to them because they're not you. In any war, we always have racial epithets or horrible names for people that we're fighting because we want to dehumanize them. They're other, they're not me. But ultimately, what all spiritual traditions teach us, if you take them far enough beyond the stress management, is that you quiet down your mind to experience more of that inner sense of peace and well-being and health and joy. And if you take it even further, that sense of transcendence, that on one level, you are the other, you're you and I'm me. But on another level, we're all part of something larger that connects us, whatever name you give to that. Even to name it is to limit what's really a limitless or ineffable experience. And that's where, to me, the roots of compassion come from. If you see that you're fundamentally different, I can do bad things to you. If I see you as myself in another form, then it's like, okay, how can we be more loving and caring and compassionate to each other, and realize that that's ultimately what frees us from our own suffering. And in some ways, it's the most selfish thing we can do, to be what Aldous Huxley called this perennial philosophy of love and compassion and altruism and forgiveness, because that's what frees us from our suffering. That's what keeps us from disturbing our own inner peace, that allows us to reclaim that in our own way. And then, in a sense, to use the experience of suffering, whether it's being diagnosed with diabetes or heart disease or depression, whatever it happens to be, as a doorway or as a catalyst for transforming our lives in ways that we might not have done otherwise. Because, change is hard, but if someone can guide you when you're suffering into a way that, in the ways that we're talking about here, I can't tell you how many people said, being diagnosed with diabetes was the best thing that ever happened to me, or having a heart attack or breast cancer or whatever was the best thing. And I'm sure you've had people, you're nodding, I'm sure you've had people tell you that too. And the first time someone said that to me, I said, what are you, nuts? They said, no, you don't get it. This is what it took for me to get my attention, to begin doing these things that have improved the quality of my life to such a degree that I probably never would have done otherwise. And so it's part of our conspiracy of love, if you will, that enables us to help people use suffering as a doorway for transforming their lives for the better.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that, actually, because I tell people that all the time. At the age of 22, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And for the first year, the message was, woe is me. My life sucks because blank. But once I sort of decided that this was actually the catalyst and the motivator that I needed to actually change my life, it was by far the best thing that ever happened to me. So I fully agree. Yeah. So earlier, at the very beginning of this interview, you talked about the fact that physicians don't necessarily receive an adequate amount of nutrition training in medical school. So in 2014, you co-authored a paper called A Deficiency of Nutrition Education in Medical Training, in which you wrote that physicians frequently lack substantive nutrition knowledge and counseling necessary to guide their patients. So the question for you is, why is this the case? Why are doctors not trained in nutrition? And what needs to change in order for the next generation of doctors to actually become well-versed in nutrition so they can prioritize the effect of nutrition on reversing chronic disease?
Well, I don't think I'm a cynical person, but then again, most cynical people don't, they just think they're being realistic. So maybe I'm more cynical than I think, but it's follow the money. We're trained, most doctors are genuinely interested in the well-being of their patients. I know that for a fact. But if we're trained to use drugs in surgery and we're reimbursed to use drugs in surgery, then we tend to use drugs in surgery. And that's why I spent 16 years working with Medicare to create this new benefit category. Well, they now pay for our program for reversing heart disease and other conditions, because if you change reimbursement, you change medical practice and even medical education. I mean, stents and angioplasties are a perfect example. They've been covered for decades, but the most recent randomized trials show that in stable patients, they generally don't work nearly as well as people thought. They don't prevent heart attacks, prolong life, reduce angina, and so on. And yet, so we've been paying for these things that are dangerous, invasive, expensive, and largely ineffective. But doctors do them because, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see everything as a nail, like Abraham Maslow once said. So we're giving people to say, drugs and surgery are not bad. They can be life-saving in a crisis. If you're in diabetic ketoacidosis, those drugs are going to save your life. If you're having a heart attack and somebody can put a stent in and open an artery that's going to otherwise cause a lot of damage, that's really cool. But for most people who are stable, the randomized trials show that they don't work that well, but they've been paid for, so that's what people are doing. And that's why it was so important for me when I realized that, through my nonprofit institute, we were training hospitals and clinics and physician groups around the country. We trained 53 different sites, got bigger changes in lifestyle, better clinical outcomes, bigger cost savings, better adherence. And they closed down some of them because we didn't have the reimbursement. And they all said the same, great program, one of the best we've ever had, but we can't afford it because it's not reimbursable. So that's why I spent 16 years to work with Medicare. And now that Medicare is paying for it, many and most of the other insurance companies are. So we can create a new paradigm that's more caring and compassionate, that's also more cost-effective and competent because it's now reimbursable. And I think that ultimately is changing medical education along with it.
100% agree. So we have, on that same tip, we have a number of clients who make lifestyle change a priority in their life, and they see dramatic positive change living with diabetes. But then they go to their doctor, and when they speak with their doctor, they get pushback because their doctor just isn't well versed in lifestyle change at all. And so, they're sort of frustrated by this because on one hand, they're making all the changes that are making a significant improvement in their life for the first time in a while, but then their medical team says the exact opposite message. So do you have any suggestions for people, who are in this situation, kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, where they're receiving two different messages and they get, don't know what to do?
Well, one approach is to find a doctor that's supportive. That's always the best way. And more doctors. We were just at the American College of Lifestyle Medicine last week, and over 1,000 doctors came from 32 different countries. I mean, this is really a movement that hasn't even begun to, a tidal wave that hasn't even begun to crest yet. So it should be easier and easier to find doctors like that. But even if you want to stay with your own doctor, say, look, let's be scientists here. You know, the nice thing about diabetes is you have a very easy way of measuring the objective outcomes. Measure your blood sugar, chart your blood sugar. You know, a lot of the new apps will chart it for you automatically and say, look, here's where I started changing my diet. Look what happened to my blood sugar. It's gotten so low, you probably need to reduce or get me off some of these medications. You become the example for your doctor. Now, as doctors, we like large randomized controlled trials, but we also like stories, you know, and stories can be powerful and even healing. And so to the extent that you, as your N of one study, can show your doctor that when you began eating a whole foods plant-based diet and preferably doing, you know, stressful raise your blood sugar independent of your diet. So if you can manage stress and exercise and have more love and support in your life all at the same time, your blood sugar is likely going to come down. Show your doctor and just say, this is where I began my change, my lifestyle changes. Look what's happened to my blood sugar. You know, isn't that cool? You know, and the doctor will go, gosh, that's kind of interesting. And so you become the teacher for your doctor. And then if other patients begin to do that, nothing will change their thinking like one of their own patients who's doing this, and they can see the objective measures of that.
Do you have any specific recommendations on dietary fat intake? So at our program, you know, we're really much into teaching people a low-fat, plant-based whole food diet, and sometimes there's a lot of confusion, even within the plant-based world. So do you have specific recommendations, and how do you address people who might get confused about fat intake, even from whole plant foods?
Well, you know, in our studies, we found that, and even the class study done by David Blankenhorn years ago, one of the first studies to show reversal of heart disease with drugs, actually was the first study to show reversal of heart disease with drugs. They found that dietary cholesterol and dietary fat intake of all types was associated with an increased amount of blockages and the more severity of the blockages. And we found that in our studies too. Now, on the other hand, there are some good fats. My mentor, when I was at Mass General and Harvard Medical School, Dr. Alexander Leaf, who was chief of medicine, did the pioneering work on omega-3 fatty acids, whether you get them from fish oil or we get them from flaxseed oil or even the plankton-based organisms that really where the fish get them from, you know, anyway, by eating the plankton. The omega-3 fatty acids are very beneficial, and particularly with diabetes, they will lower your triglycerides, they will help keep your blood sugar under better control, they reduce the incidence of heart disease, you know, lots of bad things that they can help prevent. And so, but you don't need that much. You need about 1 gram a day of EPA plus DHA, which in most formulations you'll have 3 grams or so. And you know, there are no clean fish out there. And so getting it from fish oil is one of the few examples where it's better to get it from a supplement than in nutrition, because you can remove the bad stuff, the dioxins, the PCB, the mercury and things like that, because all fish are contaminated, some just more than others. Or you can get it from the plant-based omega-3s. I think that seeds and nuts also have, although they're high in fat, there's a germinative quality to them. You know, seeds and nuts by definition are, you know, like this powerful life force that is just waiting to emerge. And so I've been impressed by so many studies showing that seeds and nuts in relatively small quantities are associated with a lot of improvements. So we include those in our diet now where we hadn't before. But on the other hand, you know, all oils are 100% fat. Fat has 9 calories per gram. And so if you eat a lot of fat, you're going to get a lot more calories. Or put another way, if you eat less fat, you're going to get fewer calories, even if you eat the same volume of food. So I wrote a book years ago called Eat More, Weigh Less, that was based on the finding that the average patient in our study lost 24 pounds in the first year, even though they were eating more food and more frequently. They're eating whenever they're hungry, eating till they're full, and they still lost weight and kept it off, because it's more the volume of food than the density of the calories that makes the difference in how you feel. So, and again, there are literally hundreds of thousands of protective substances in fruits and vegetables that have anti-heart disease, anti-cancer, anti-diabetes, and anti-aging properties.
Terrific. Okay, so you've been doing this work for a long time. You've helped countless people through the journey of making lifestyle change. What is the #1 challenge that you see people face when it comes to making these changes, and how would you recommend they overcome that challenge?
I don't think there's one thing for everyone. I think the biggest misconception, and what I would love to see changed, is this ethos that, you know, am I going to live longer? Is it going to seem longer? You know, am I going to, you know, Woody Allen said, the only way you get to live to be 100 is by not doing the things that make you want to live to be 100. You know, the different variations on that theme. And so, and if that really were the choice, you know, there's a case to be made for having more fun and dying early, you know, but it's not. I mean, like I say, I grew up in Texas eating meat all the time. And your palate changes as you begin to eat more healthily. You actually begin to prefer foods that are good for you. The foods that seem like they were just right and a lot of fat and a lot of salt, suddenly when you stop eating them, the food tastes too salty or too fatty. It's not even, it's like if you've ever switched from, if you're drinking milk from whole milk to skim milk. At first the skim milk tastes like water and then tastes fine. And you go out to dinner, suddenly the whole milk tastes like cream. You can't even drink it. It feels too greasy and fatty. Or if you reduce salt intake and suddenly after a week or two, the salt intake is now, that's the new normal. And you go out to dinner, suddenly the food tastes too salty. You have to ask for it to no added salt. And actually the flavor comes through better. You don't put all that salt on it. So when people realize that what you gain is so much more than what you give up, and that because these underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic, most people feel so much better so quickly, it really reframes the whole reason for change from fear of dying or fear of something bad happening, which is not sustainable, to joy and pleasure and freedom and love and feeling that they really are.
I love it. Your message is universal. That's what I love about this. It doesn't matter. Just like you said, we'll meet you where you are. You start from where you are, and you make the change that's actually going to lead to the most, positive effects. So, thank you so much for your time today. We really enjoyed talking to you and really appreciate all your knowledge.
Well, thank you, and keep up your great work. And I hope this has been beneficial. And again, for people who are watching this, if you want more information about our work, just go to ornish.com. Everything on there is free. And we appreciate all of us who do this work, the chance to be of service. So thank you so much.